Hey folks, it's Ted. Today I am going to do a bit of a different kind of live stream. Um, I am used to doing live streams where it's more about kind of program or prototyping a specific game. Uh, I've been working on Rogue Deck Builder, this roguelike deck builder tower defense kind of game. Um, But I actually wanted to do something a little bit more topical. So that's what today's stream is. It's how to make art for a game if you're coming from a programming background. So this is a problem that I've actually faced when I first started prototyping games, and it's something that I kind of wish if the right person had been there at that time to kind of give me the right advice, I might have avoided a number of different traps that one can go down when trying to prototype games. Um, Basically, when you're just making a prototype for a game, you have this challenge where you need to have art that's good enough to communicate the gameplay, but not so good that it becomes a distraction that stops you from. Well, it can't be so good that you're getting into the details too much and you're not just focusing on the game's gameplay. So if you end up going down this rabbit hole of um, doing artwork that's too detailed, you'll just end up spending all your time on just the art. And now all of a sudden you're not really making just an actual game that people can play. So I'm kind of doing this live stream because a friend of mine actually pointed out to me, he's like, wow, I'm kind of amazed at the progress you've made with this game. And what's kind of impressive is the fact that the artwork that you've made is really it's kind of like good up to a point. It's good up to this point of being able to communicate the gameplay, and then it's kind of no better than that. And so what I want to do is actually just talk about game art for a little bit, talk about sort of the problems that you're going to face if you're coming into game prototyping with more of a game developer's skill set and not really an artist skill set. So that's kind of if you were to sort of like look at my profile, my strengths and weaknesses, I'd say I'm very strong in the programming side of things. I'd say I'm like okay at game design. I think I'm pretty good at it, but I could work on it a little bit more, quite a bit more. And then artwork, I would say I'm kind of weak at that. And I know that I need to improve it quite a bit. And then there's other skills that I just totally lack, right? So I completely lack the music and sound effects skill set. Um, I think I appreciate good music, but if you ask me to like compose something or do anything with music and sound effects, I'd be like I don't know because I've never done it. I've kind of always hired somebody to do that. So here's the challenge that you face when you first start out. Okay, you have a number of different ways that you could kind of try and solve this problem as a programmer, right? You can't really prototype a game. You can't make a game if you don't have any art, right? So that's obviously like not making art is kind of not an option, right? Um, Another option that I tried early on was making artwork or like hiring artwork from the very beginning of the game. So I used to do this actually when I first started prototyping games. I would I would go and try and find an artist and hire an artist, and then I'd sit down and I'd have all these different ideas of things that I thought needed to be in the game, right? So maybe for this game, like Rogue Deck Builder, right? I would have thought, okay, well, there needs to be something like post holes in the game, and there needs to be some concept of joists, and there needs to be some concept of connecting them, and there needs to be some concept of like putting, deck panels on top of the deck, all this stuff, right? And I would have communicated that kind of thing to my artist, right? And then I would have said, okay, well, um, I'll, pay you this money to do this artwork. And then usually they'd get back to me after some period of time. And then they'd have the artwork and I could put it in the game and then I could start prototyping the game. Okay. Now, that's really only in what I would consider a very ideal situation, right? Which is to say, when you go out there and you try and find people to work with, it's going to be a very mixed bag of things. Okay, some people are going to be just awesome and they're going to instantly get you what you want. They're going to be great to communicate with. They're never going to like disappear off the planet. They're just awesome, right? So that's a whole, there's definitely people like that. Then there's people that are kind of like middle of the road, like they mostly do good work, but then there's like random things like they stop communicating for like a few days to a week and you're just like really frustrated. Or like maybe like things that you ask for are late, right? So that can happen too. That's kind of the middle of the road. And then of course there's like the bottom of the bucket, which is just people that, can't really keep any commitments at all and can't do great work and all that stuff. I guess you just wouldn't really ever work with those people. So I guess it's more of like do you end up with like a more of a middle of the road kind of person, or do you end up with somebody that's just awesome, right? But what I found very frequently when I would ask for artwork before having ever prototyped any of the gameplay, when I would go and talk to an artist and be like, hey, here's what I think the game's going to be. Here's what I think the rules are going to be. And then they would go and, and then they might have a bunch of questions. But the thing about it is what sucked about that was I never had actually prototyped enough of the game itself to be able to really definitively tell them exactly what I need. And so oftentimes my communication with my artists would end up getting, it got to a point where it just like, I started asking myself, like, what am I even doing reaching out to these people this early in the project, right? Because they're not really game designers, right? So quite a few of the artists would come back and they'd be like, well, what's the lore of this game? What's this character like? Like, is this character an elf? Is this character a princess? Is this, all of these kinds of, is this, what sort of like, art genre or style is this? Is it a science fiction game? Is it a fantasy game? Like, what's the story of this game? They'd be asking all these questions about things that are not really having anything to do with the gameplay, right? And here I was just wanting to get them to give me something that I could use for gameplay prototyping, right? And so what I found was that that without some basic like a level of art in the game, it was actually very difficult for me to properly art direct the people that I had tried to hire to do the artwork for my game, right? I couldn't really tell them exactly what I wanted because I hadn't really started prototyping the game enough to a level where I could really communicate that effectively. And the other thing too is, look, if you have to rely on an artist in order to even get started prototyping your game, well, what does that ends up just becoming an excuse to not really work on your game, right? It's like, well, I can't work on this game now because, I'm waiting for my artist to get me these sprites. Well, I'm waiting for this thing. I'm waiting for that thing. And maybe what I would say is like, notice that pattern of behavior, right? Because that's kind of a thing that a lot of it's you're giving yourself a convenient excuse to procrastinate on it, right? You're basically saying to yourself, oh, well, I got like, once this art comes in, once that art, then I can really work on it. Then I can really work on it. But the thing is, all that you'll end up doing, and in my experience, all I ended up doing in that case was just waiting for people to do things, right? I'm waiting for this art, I'm waiting for that, and not actually working on the game. So that's why I have arrived where I am now in terms of like, there's different things you can do. You could maybe hire somebody else very early on. I basically don't do that anymore at all because what I have found is it just becomes this excuse to procrastinate. It just becomes another reason not to work on your game. And so if that's the case, then now all of a sudden you've arrived kind of where I have, which is I think that game programmers, especially independent game programmers, should have some kind of minimal art skill set. Okay? Minimal, what does that mean? Well, you're probably not going to be the best artist out there for games, and that's okay. You're going to know enough about art to be able to create something that properly communicates the gameplay for your game, right? Something where if I look at it, just by looking at it, I can know what it's telling me, the player, that I can do or can't do, right? So that's why I would call that kind of like a minimal artist skill set. A more maximal artist skill set might be something like, I really understand, actually, if I just go on here, I'll show you more. If I was like doing pixel art, okay, a more maximal kind of skill set for art would be something like if I go on like lowspec.com, okay? Like, let's look at some of these like tutorials, right? This would be like a more maximal, like somebody that could do this, I would say, right? So who is this? Try Happy, right? So somebody that really, really understands light and shadow and how to create these very interesting shapes in a cloud, right? I mean, just look at this. This is absolutely beautiful. And it's got that kind of like pixel art constraint. But I would posit that as a game developer, as like somebody that's just trying to communicate gameplay, you probably could have stopped like right here or right here at something that kind of has that like rough cloud shape. It's got enough to kind of communicate the shape of it, but not so much that you're spending a ton of detail, right? So somebody that can really get the light and shadow working in this example can add all this texture. That's a maximal artist skill set, I would say. But somebody who can at least get some like basic readable shapes down, that's the kind of skill set. Actually, look at this little like profile picture here, like of this guy, right? That's more like a programmer art skill set, right? It's just enough to communicate what it is, but not so much that it's ultra detailed and you're having to spend a lot of time on it. So that's, I think that programmers who make games, probably even programmers that make other kinds of software, should have this kind of minimal art skill set, this minimal, this ability to kind of make things that it looks like the thing, but it's not super detailed. So if you've never done art for a game before, how do you acquire this skill, right? Well, what I ended up doing is I ended up doing a bunch of research, going on to various tutorials online. I think I looked at a number of different artists doing this on YouTube. I looked at Adam Eunice, who's the other guy? Brandon James Greer is another really good pixel artist. And they have great pixel art tutorials that will teach you how to do pretty much all of it, from scratch. But I guess I haven't really found anything that's more coming at an angle of if you're a game developer, right? If you're just trying to focus on the gameplay, knowing that you'll probably hire an artist later or something of that nature. What is good enough, right? So what are some of the basic like art skills that you would want to have? So if I'm really thinking about that, one of the first things I would think of is simply the ability to understand shapes and how shapes communicate readability. So when I first started having a bit of an aha moment with my own art skills was when I began to create art with a silhouette first. Okay. So like, let's say, so here's an example from my recent game, Rogue Deck Builder, right? Okay. This is the repair icon, right? And what I have is, I have this thing right next to a fully colored in version, right? Okay. So there's the silhouette, and then there's the fully colored in version, right? Now notice how even how the color is almost doesn't really matter, right? This, like, I could color this almost anything and I would still know like that's a wrench, right? And then if I'm playing the game, I'd be able to look at that and I'd be like, that communicates that you can repair it. Just instantly, like, it's a wrench. Wrenches are for repairing. So if there's some kind of repair mechanic in the game, I'm immediately going to look at wrench and I'm going to know what that is. So when you're first starting, what I tend to do is I tend to pick a dark color, sort of like a purplish color, right? And then I just will draw things that I think might look like a silhouette of the shape that I am trying to make. So like maybe if I was going to do like a peace sign, right? Something like that, you know? Maybe I would just try and do, I'll probably mess this up, but actually, if I try and do like, yeah, let's just try, like, what about a peace sign, okay? You know, if I wanted to communicate something about peace or whatever, I might just do like this kind of thing. And then maybe what I would try and do is I'd try and do like a circle around it, you know? But the whole point is to try and make a shape first, right? And then allow that, yeah, there we go, peace sign. Okay, that's like pretty close. It's pretty close, right? And all I'm doing is I've got a really kind of small canvas size. I've got maybe like, it's like a 16 by 16 sprite. So it's not like a really big sprite. You don't want to start pixel art with really, really big sprites because it can get to be it's too unconstrained. So if you're just starting out, I would suggest a really, really small sprite size. 16 by 16 works really well. Here I've got 8 by 8. And so this is even smaller. Actually, if you're really starting out, 8 by 8 is a really good one because you can really start to see, like, let's say I want to do like a guy, right? Then I really have so few actual options here, right? In terms of how much I can draw, you know, and it's like, if I look at that, is that like really a guy, you know? Not quite, right? So then how might I change it so that it looks more like a guy? Like maybe I do this, right? That's getting closer actually, right? Or maybe I do this, you know? But it still doesn't look quite right. This looks closer, right? So all I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to get to something that looks like the shape, you know? Maybe that. Nah, see, that's not quite enough. What did I actually end up doing for my game? Oops. Okay, yeah. Actually, yeah, I did do that. So it's a big head, right? The head's too small. Oh, but then maybe this needs to be like wider. Yeah, okay. That starts to look like a guy, right? What else did I do? Okay, I actually just filled it in entirely. That could look like maybe like a fat guy, right? If you were looking at that from a distance, you might think to yourself, hey, that could be a person, right? Or I think, what did I do? It was like this, yeah, okay. So then you just kind of like build that shape up. That looks kind of like a guy. That could be a guy, right? So my point being, If you look at it from a distance, does it look like, and it doesn't even have any color, right? Don't even think about color when you're starting out with programmer art or really any kind of art. Think about just the readability of the shape, right? If I look at this, does it read like the shape that I'm thinking about? So basically, all of the artwork in Rogue Deck Builder started out just as a silhouette, right? So the random event marker, for example, okay, this question mark here, you know, the first thing I did is I tried to draw something just using the same color. I tried to draw something that I could identify as a question mark, right? Just something that, just with the silhouette color, could I get the shape right? That's the first problem that I solved. Okay, I can get the shape right. It looks like a question mark. And then the next part is actually really easy. I just have a color palette and then I pick a color that I think would work in the game. And that's that. Now I've got a thing that represents random events, you know. So, and, you know, it took a little bit of a while to kind of get this shape right. But again, I'm only working inside of a 16 by 16 box. So that really limits the amount of options that I have. Those creative constraints that I impose on myself force me to make something that's simple and kind of, you know, does the job, not overly elaborate, right? Just kind of gets to the point. And it would be, so here's a similar thing, right? With the cards that you can pick up, I wanted something that kind of looks like a card, right? Something that, where if I was looking at it and it's dark, you know, I'm just looking at the silhouette. If I was just looking at that silhouette, would I be able to tell that that's a card, right? And if I can tell that that's a card, then the next phase of the art creation process would be to just figure out what the colors are going to be and then make some other smaller shapes inside of that. So here I've got, you know, I just picked the same brown color that you have for the cards in the game, like this color. And then I also picked kind of like a light, like a white sort of as the border, and then maybe this is like a turret or something that you can build, and this like is just a little bit of text or whatever, right? And it looks like a card, you know, because I started with a very readable silhouette, okay? And now it's kind of a similar thing with like the oh, here's one, like your hearts, right? So, you know, here's for a health, like a heart is a very, I would say, iconic and recognizable shape, right? It's just something where pretty much anybody can draw a heart and you'd be able to know what that is. And then all you got to do is you just got to pick a color palette and then fill in the details. You know, now you've got a heart that's red. A gun is a pretty simple thing that you can draw. So all I did was I just kind of played around with the shape. And people recognize this, you know, they recognize that as a gun. It's pretty easy to tell. But I was just playing around with like drawing some different lines, and maybe I could have like a trigger there and I could have a little scope. Just using the silhouette color. And then once that looks like, you know, if I look at it from a distance, is that a gun? Yeah, now I can fill it in with some detail colors, right? So really, really pretty easy. You know, you're going to have to spend some time playing around with different shapes and getting the silhouettes right. But that's really, if you're a programmer that's got no art skills, that's the place to start. Definitely the place to start. The actual deck building itself part was probably the hardest to do. And the reason is because it needs to sort of look three-dimensional. So for a prototyping perspective, this is probably the hardest bit of art to do, but it was also kind of essential to the game. But here, even there, I started with this really basic kind of silhouette, right? So it's just, does this look like it could be a post sticking up out of the ground, right? Even if there's no color information in there? And the answer is yes. And then you have to sort of, once you've got that, you have to fill in all the other colors, right? So I've got kind of this like patch of brown around it. Here's maybe a darker valued thing kind of around the edges of it, right? And then something that's facing towards you is going to have like kind of like a darker shade of gray, but then the top of it is going to be a little bit of a lighter shade of that same gray, right? Because the sun is shining down on it. And then it's kind of a similar thing too with this kind of wood color, right? So the joists kind of connecting the different post holes, I picked like kind of a lighter brown for the top, and then a bit of a darker brown for the side here that's facing you. And then all of these kind of became these like Lego pieces. So I took that concept, I drew these things, and then I kind of split it up into all these different pieces. So here's kind of the deconstructed parts of the deck right here, right? So here's the full post hole, but then here's all the different parts of the post hole, right? So I have this option to kind of draw all of those in different layers. And then here's all the different joist connection pieces, right? So if I'm connecting up a piece of a deck with these joists, here's kind of, depending on how you're connecting it, every single joist in the game is just some combination of these. Really simple. So I took the art from kind of its final state, and then I sort of broke it down into these different kind of sections or pieces, right? And it really comes down to, let's look at the other one. Like when I started doing turrets, here's all the artwork that I did for the turrets, right? And I had a lot of these different concepts for what sort of shape looks like it could be a turret. And then I basically landed on this one. This looked the most like it could be a turret. And then I kind of used that sort of design language to inform the design language for basically everything else that you can build. So then I took the same kind of concept for like, here's a turret that gets a faster fire rate. Here's a turret that gets like a bigger knockback. Here's a repair building, something that gives you like more repairs. Here's a long range turret. So there's all these other options that are in there, but it all started from this one concept of something that where just the shape, just the silhouette looks like it could be a turret. So if I was, starting out with any kind of artwork, and another thing too is that the more time that you spend prototyping this kind of artwork or just sort of like throwing this artwork together, the better you get at the skill. Like you do genuinely get better as an artist. You get to a point where some of these other things where you're not spending quite so much time on it, and you can kind of quickly bang through all the different artwork that you're going to have in your game. So here's the rock, right? And actually that rock, let's see if I have the silhouette for the rock. It's got to be here somewhere. But actually I'll take it over here. So when I did the resources for the game, this rock right here, I can just take, here's the silhouette color, and I'll just fill it in with the silhouette color, right? So if I was just looking at that silhouette, right, would I be able to tell, does that look like a rock? I think, yeah, kind of actually. And that's actually where I started with this. I started with that silhouette, and then I thought, okay, well, to make it really look a little bit more like a rock, we just got to kind of have these different lines and definitions for maybe different parts that are getting illuminated by different things. So the top is always going to be bright, and there's going to be this other side that's maybe not quite as bright, and then this sort of front-facing side that's a bit dark. And now all of a sudden we've got a rock, and then you can just kind of palette swap the different things. So that is what I would say is a really good process for doing early kind of game art. The other thing too is you probably want to have some kind of text in your game. So just do really, really simple text. Don't get super detailed. Just have like one texture for every letter in the alphabet. Just throw it into a texture atlas and just call it a day. Like don't get super elaborate on any of the text and numbers. If you can more or less read it, then it's fine enough for early prototyping. What else do I want to touch on? I feel like I just talked a lot. some of the icons are a little bit more difficult to do, like this end turn icon. You know, the silhouette for that was actually took a while to get right. I think I started, sometimes you have to start with a shape that's like a circle, and then you have to kind of like break it down into all the other component parts. But once you've got that silhouette that looks right, you can just color it something and it's good. Oh yes, I want to talk about color palettes. Okay. So generally speaking, one thing I would do if I was starting the artwork for this game actually started out in the Pico 8 color palette. I'm actually going to see if I can find that. Maybe this is it. Yeah, okay, yeah. So this is the very, very first artwork for the game. This would have been, I think I made this artwork back in the summer. Yeah, it does. I don't think that there's really a reason to put things in. Okay, so actually, I gotta start learning to like just read the question. So here's the question. It seems like having everything in one atlas simplifies things a lot, and I would absolutely agree. Especially for early prototyping a game. You know, remember, you're really just focusing on the gameplay. So if you've got like all these different sprite atlases for all this different stuff, you know, maybe this one's like a 40 by 40 and this one's like a, you know, 50 by 50 and, or this one's a 16 by 16. What I would say is just have one sprite atlas with the biggest, with sprites for like the biggest thing in your game. Actually, like if I was to go, most of Moose Solutions, so my other game, my first like official commercial game that I made. Let's see if I can. Moose Solutions. Let's look at the artwork. Oh no, that's not. Where is that? Oh, it's this, right? Sorry. Yeah. I'll read that question soon, but I wanted to just finish with, okay, so the artwork for Moose Solutions, I think I've got, yeah, almost all the artwork for this game, for the official game, Moose Solutions, the puzzle game that I released. It's all in this one, most of it's in this like giant sprite sheet, right? I put it all in here, and then this is what actually goes into the game. And pretty much all of the artwork is like 40 by 40 sprites, right? Now there's other artwork that's a little bit different. I can kind of get into that because I needed to use different files for the different themes, like the summer, winter, and fall themes. So, because I wanted to have different palettes for them. But basically, I ended up throwing all of the artwork, even kind of while I was doodling. Like, look, a lot of this other stuff is just doodles here. You know, it's not really serious art. It's just me kind of like playing around with things. But I even put my doodles in the same sprite atlas, just because I like to have everything kind of like close by. So I would just say like, yeah, play around with it. Put it all in one sprite sheet and make that the sprite sheet for the biggest sprite that you have in the game. So for Rogue Deck Builder, everything is in a 16 by is in a single sprite sheet. It's 16 by 16 pixels for every sprite. And now, once I decide to, if I ever decide to make the artwork better, like maybe I go into like high resolution or whatever, then I would just make another big sprite sheet with me. You know, maybe what it is, every sprite is like 128 by 128. You know, you pick some number, right? And all the artwork would go in there. Like, you need to have a good reason to actually make your process more complicated, I would say. Just kind of default to things being simple. But so going back to like, this is the original Rogue Deck Builder artwork, okay? It was, I started with 8x8 sprites. I think this is 8x8, right? Yeah, that's 8x8. And then the color palette that I picked, I'm in Aseprite, by the way. That's the tool that I use. So Aseprite actually has a bunch of different color palettes. It just gives you these things out the bat. So off the bat. so I started with the Pico 8 color palette, which I like it because it's got kind of a lot of variety to it. I guess maybe one thing I don't like about it is the colors might be like a little bit oversaturated. So there could be some problems with that. But notice how this is the very first artwork for the game. And the very first thing that I started with was just the Pico 8 color palette. And I started with just a simple like, how can I draw the process of building the deck? Like, what would that look like, right? Just what would that look like? And I started with these post holes, and look how like there was just enough colors in the Pico 8 color palette for me to be able to kind of express this. I at first wanted to have like guardrails in the deck, but now I'm kind of like, I don't think I want that. But I was just trying to like see if I could draw that and make that look good. And I even had the different, here's kind of like a post hole, here's a joist, right? I had all these concepts and I had icons for them, and I had the cards, all that stuff. I had the player character and the enemies. I had all of that in just 8x8 sprites, right? It wasn't until later on that I think the reason that I eventually increased the resolution to 16 by 16, and then I also changed the color palette, was because I was really starting to feel like I was kind of cracking under the limitations of this color palette. I just felt like I wasn't able to get quite this is kind of orange. There's not really a good brown that like represents what a deck looks like, so that was weird. And so eventually I switched over to a slightly higher resolution, 16 by 16. And then I also picked a different color palette. I picked this Apollo color palette, which you can actually get on Lowspec. Let's see where that is, lowspec.com. They have a bunch of these different color palettes. So if you want to find something that kind of like represents what, like maybe I can search for Apollo. Yeah, here it is. And this is by Adam C. Eunice. He's also got a lot of really good tutorials on how to make pixel art. But he's also kind of more of an artist. So it's just different because he's not, a lot of his games, I don't think he's like really prototyping it from the gameplay first side. It's almost more like from the art and expression side. So there's a difference there. But this is a great color palette. It's got kind of a lot of variety to it, covers a lot of ground. So I've been using that one for Rogue Deck Builder. And so that kind of gets you color palettes. But what I would say is if you're just starting out, if you've never made any kind of game artwork ever for a game and you're just trying to prototype your first game, I would say keep it as simple as possible. Start out with the smallest sprite size possible, like 8 pixels by 8 pixels is fine. Like you can actually express a lot, and that constraint will force you to really think about how the shapes work and the silhouettes, and how to like really carefully pick. Plus, like, you don't have to worry about performance or anything like that. Like all these spreadsheets, they load so fast, right? They load like lightning. You don't have to worry about any problems with like resource usage or any of that stuff. So that's like always nice. And you can just focus on prototyping your game, okay? Using a simple color palette, really small sprites. Start very constrained. When you start out as an artist, you want to start out as constrained as you can, and then as you develop skill, as you notice you're getting better and better and better, you can start to lift a few more of those constraints. You can start to expand a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. But one of the things I experienced when I first started making game art for what was just this feeling of being totally overwhelmed with all of the different choices that I could be making, right? I had this feeling of, what color am I supposed to use? And and I would just try and draw stuff, and I would just like use all these like random colors. And it's just literally, I didn't know what I was doing. And of course, like none of the art was good, right? But if what you do instead is you start with a shape and then you pick a color palette and stick to that color palette, don't deviate from the color palette until you get enough skill to be able to make your own palettes, you'll find that you'll find that you're actually making more progress as an artist. You'll find that your art is actually getting better. It's more able to clearly communicate the gameplay. And now you can actually get on with your prototyping without having to rely on somebody else to get you something so you can continue with your prototyping. You basically, if you have this skill set, you have no excuse to procrastinate. You have no reason to procrastinate because now, like if there's going to be artwork in your game prototype, you are the one that has to make it. And you can make it. You actually can do it. It's not this like weird esoteric skill set. I think pretty much anybody can make artwork like this. So take a little bit of a drink there. Got another question. Also, having a UI tile map makes it easier to just put things on the screen. I feel like having to recompile 5 times anytime I add. I feel like I have to recompile 5 times anytime I add a UI element. Yeah, 100%. I do that as well, because a lot of UI is kind of built up from the ground, and so this is kind of a bit of a separate thing too, because a lot of what's going to be in your game is going to be user interface stuff. And now, to a programmer coming into game development from, say, perhaps a more traditional programming background, which actually was the case for me. So I got into game development after already having been a professional, mobile app developer. I was mostly doing iPhone apps, right? And I guess I just want to highlight the contrast here because when I was doing mobile apps, pretty much everything that you do is provided to you through a kit of some kind. So if I was to do like user interface on iPhone, it would be like I use UIKit. And UIKit's got all this stuff in it, so I don't have to do any art, right? And I don't have to understand how any of that stuff works, right? It's like I would use, I'd use like a UI table view, and then the table view would like populate with text, and it would have all the separator lines. Or if I do like a rounded button, like the rounded corners on the button would already be taken care of. All I have to do is just like hook together, kind of glue together all these different components from this kit. And then, I get my button or whatever, and it's all kind of designed for me. You don't even have to understand how any of it works. You just have to kind of like follow their rules, and then you get a user interface for you. So if you're a programmer that's kind of coming from that background, right, a more traditional app development background where you use a kit and it's all done for you, you might not even know how to do user interface from scratch, right? And like, where would you even start, right? And so what I ended up doing was recognizing what the various building blocks of a user interface are, right? Most of what's in a user interface is going to be things like the edges of a window, right? So could this be the edge of a window, right? I've got one rounded corner here, I've got kind of a top, and I've got another rounded corner, I've got a side, I've got this corner here. I can use this like 3x3 grid for this 3x3 UI grid to actually, I can express a lot of different user interfaces with something like this. I can do like most windows, I could do a card, I could do a text box. There's actually a ton of different things that I could do with something as simple as a 3x3. So that's kind of a basic user interface building block that you could do for your game. The health bar. Okay, so here's kind of another one. All my game has all these different health bars, and so what I've actually got is like the left side, and then the middle side, and then the right side, and based on a percentage of how much health it has, it'll kind of use this like progress bar graphic to fill it in, fill a percentage in. And so a lot of this stuff isn't really something that anybody would necessarily know, because what you're probably used to doing is like, you go to UIKit, and UIKit has this thing called a UI progress bar, and then it just fills, and it's some object oriented thing, and you set like the property of the progress, and then it shows how much progress is there. But something like this, you've got to load the graphics into your somewhere, right? And then you've got to decide like which texture are we using to draw this. You've got to then figure out what percentage we're actually using. I think I ended up using like a linear interpolation function in order to figure out how much of the progress bar to draw. So I did all that stuff myself, but if you're coming at it from like, what art would I need to do, right? The art that you would need to do just as a basic developer would be something like the shape for the progress bar container, right? Like this little shape, and then the actual progress shape, right? The filling in shape. So you'd have to do all that and then program it in somehow, right? So, obviously text would also kind of count as user interface, but there's a lot of different things that you might be very used to having it just done for you for user interface. But actually, if you're doing the art yourself and you're doing the game design yourself, you're going to have to build all those different UI components, or like do the artwork for those different UI components yourself. Even if it's just really basic and really simple, and later on you're gonna go and make it much more robust. That's kind of where you have to start. So, first of all, I just spoke a lot. So I'll take a brief moment to just kind of collect my thoughts. But, okay, I'll recap. I believe that having that any kind of a programmer that's wants to make games on their own, I believe it is vital to have some kind of minimal artist skill set. I absolutely believe that. And I believe that because having that skill set makes you self-reliant. It makes it so that you now have no excuse not to prototype your game and not to make a lot of different game prototypes. There's really nothing stopping you from just working on your game, right? Now, not every game developer should develop their art skill to such a fine level of detail, right? There comes a point where I do believe it is valuable to delegate that skill set, right? So maybe once you have completely finished all the gameplay of your game and you've got some basic art in there that's kind of like this art, then you've got some money that you can then invest in better art, then you go hire a professional. And what's great about this strategy is that by the time you're ready to hire that professional, the game's basically done. You can tell them exactly how things need to look, how they need to work. You'll have worked through all of the design communication problems. You'll have a reference that you can show them. You'll have something where you can say to them, look, it needs to look like a card, and here's a card that I designed. It needs to look like this posthole, and here's this thing that I designed. Here's a guide, here's what I want. And furthermore, when you bring that artist on, they can actually play your game, right? They can actually play your game, and they can know what it's about, what it's about. And they're not going to have like a million different questions about what's the lore, and is this guy an elf, and is this person a witch, or none of that's going to matter, because they'll know exactly what you've already made, and their job won't be to like design the art from the ground up. Their job will be different. The job will be more like taking something that's more or less workable and then improving the aesthetics of it, improving the detail of it, improving the quality of it, right? So you're really changing the nature of the job for any artist that you bring on. And obviously you should you should give them space to be creative and have their own ideas and to take things in a direction that you yourself could never have thought of. But the important part, the design communication part, will be basically finished. And you're not going to run into that frustration when communicating with your artist. So those are the reasons why. Furthermore, I might add that there are definitely many examples of games that were made this way. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is Braid. That game was pretty much all programming art. Actually, if you play Braid Anniversary Edition, which I was playing like a few, so I would say Braid early art. Maybe I can look up some of that. Not what I was looking for. Braid video game early art. Maybe I could find that. Oh wow! So basically, all the screenshots that I have are like the amazing art. You'll have to trust me that the original art was really quite bad. Box art. Oh, that's really funny. The Russian. Oh, here we go. Oh wow. No. Okay, yeah. So that was the original artwork for Braid. I'm sorry. This looks like a postage stamp. That's pretty awful. Not really what I wanted. Can't really find any. Somebody tried to make. There's all this fan art for Braid as well. Wow. Yeah, okay, so it's pretty difficult to find any of the original art, but you'll just have to trust me that it was like when Jonathan Blow made Braid, the very first version of the game had basically all programmer art, all art that was like this. I think it was actually worse than this. It didn't look quite as good as this. He prototyped the entire game. He programmed the entire game, did the puzzles, made it work. And only once the whole game was finished, once all the puzzles and all the worlds and everything was finished, from a programming and design prototyping phase, that's when he went and contacted an artist, right? And what a better position to be in to go and find an artist for your project once you already have something that's playable and you know what it is. And now their job is, I think a lot of artists prefer to work with somebody that really knows what they're doing and knows what they want, right? So you should, by having this minimal art skill, you can be even better at knowing what you want and communicating that with your artist. And so you'll probably be able to work with better people because you'll understand a thing or two about art. And so that I've always found really helps when communicating with creative professionals. They respect you more, right? Maybe you're not the greatest artist, but if you know basic things like light and shadow and how to create a silhouette that communicates something, you'll get a lot more appreciation and respect from your artists. They might kind of perk up their ear and want to work with you, and so those are all good things. Yeah, to recap, I think it's a great skill to have, and hopefully I've demonstrated at least how to get started with that skill and what it entails for prototyping games. So I'll stop and see if there's any questions. Oh yeah. Okay, so Tahita commented the Braid development art is so funny. Yeah, it's so bad actually. Like that's what's great about it is it's like almost so comically bad, but at the same time it does the job really really well. It does the job of communicating the gameplay. You could have played that prototype and you would have understood, what it was about. Yeah, he had like Mario and Bright Green ladders that were a completely different style. Yeah, Yeah, exactly. It was pretty ugly, and I would say that actually the artwork that I've shown you here today is probably more beautiful than you would necessarily need it to be for whatever it is that you're doing. I guess I tend to have a slight preference for things at least being somewhat aesthetically pleasing. So I like to put in those constraints of, let's have a color palette and let's try to have the colors actually kind of, communicate the things they're supposed to. And, if there's a ladder, it should probably be brown, you know, like let's try and follow a few rules, but heck, you might not need to do that. For you, it might be just enough to like have a silhouette of something and then just know that you're going to bring an artist in later. All right. Well, I guess I will thank you for indulging me on one of these streams that's a little bit of a different kind of topic than what I usually do. Didn't really prototype my game today, but I thought it would be important to talk about this because I just never really had many good resources like this presented to me. Um, I have a few other ideas for other kinds of streams I want to do, but I definitely want to do more topical streams like this. And if you like this kind of thing, just let me know. Like, send a message or comment or whatever, and I'll think of some more. So prototyping focused topics are really nice. Okay, yeah, yeah. I think that there's not really enough of that actually. I think in the programming world, it's like when people are talking about programming or making things, like so much of it is focused on being like as robust as possible, and it's like the skill set you need to conceive of a completely different product or a game or something new that hasn't existed before. It's a very different skill, and so I'm hoping to like do my part and show people what those skills are. Yeah, ship a full stack app in 3 days. Well, yeah, if you're shipping a full stack app in 3 days, you're probably like, gluing together a bunch of frameworks that you don't understand or anything. So, yeah, it's whatever that is. I don't want anything to do with it. I've done my part. I worked in the industry for 10 years. Like, no, thank you. So, I am retired from that. All right. Well, this has been fun, and I think I'm taking off tomorrow, so I have like an appointment around this time, so I won't be streaming tomorrow, but I'll be streaming on Thursday and Friday. So it's always been fun, and we'll talk soon.